Hello everyone! Welcome to the Doomsday Film Festival. We're here to talk about video games as it relates to the Doomsday. Now, we just saw a film that showed a possible version of the apocalypse. Let's just go down the line. What did you think about that film and the themes that it brought to the table?
I'm going to dork it up a little bit. The thing that struck me the most is that it's actually the game that they chose at the end is strangely unindicative of video games as we know them today. Tic-tac-toe, this is kind of like a part of my dissertation. Tic-tac-toe actually has about 250,000 different distinct scenarios that it could play out, which is a lot for such a simple grid and a simple set of rules. But the whole point of the game is that you have these scenarios and these rules could sort of bring forth all these distinct possibilities. Whereas modern video games are really tremendously more simple. Most of them really have, one path down which you need to go. I mean, good designers, as you yourself, know more than anyone else probably around this table, sort of need to make it so that you won't get bored and you won't feel that you're essentially following the designer's path. But you're really just following a really linear story, whereas a tic-tac-toe is more strangely a world of possibilities. So I feel much less apocalyptic in today's video game environment.
Well, my take on this film is, the whole thing about video games, and we're getting into video game theory, and this is a little boring, but I'll try to make it short and sweet, is how the video game has always been about survival. Like the very first game, like Space Invaders, like you want to survive as long as you can. Games have changed, now we have endings, but originally it was like you last as long as you can until you get eaten by the ghost, or you get blasted by that, or you get smashed by an asteroid, etc., etc., etc. So war games is a very nice, quaint idea of building upon that whole, okay, we can actually win the game by not actually playing the game. But now, the apocalypse, thanks to technology and advances of things being so complex, now we have games where it is the end of the world. Everyone is dead. And now you got to pick up the pieces and try to figure out how far you can get along in the society. One of the key differences between video games and other forms of entertainment, whether it be like music or television and films, it's far more participatory. The closest is probably books, just because you're reading something, you're creating the imagery, you're setting the pace by how fast you read it. But finally, whereas a film like Night of the Living Dead, you're just witnessing these people, and perhaps you're yelling and screaming at them, "Don't open that door!" But in Left 4 Dead, you can literally play with. Who's familiar with Left 4 Dead, by the way? Okay, Left 4 Dead is a game in which you and 3 other people play on the internet, online, and basically there's a zombie apocalypse and you're surviving and you have to blast away zombies, but you also have to help the other person out. And they have to watch your back, you have to watch their back. Some people have certain attributes, like you're better at healing, you're better at marksmanship, etc., etc., etc. So it's a far more visceral, it's like a horror film, like, oh my God, they're coming after us, but here's a chance for survival and perhaps right the wrongs that you traditionally see in a zombie film, for example.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, I think, to me, even if the games themselves are not focused around end-of-the-world scenarios, there's something very apocalyptic about the whole game-playing experience. Because to me, when you play games, you kind of feel like the last man on Earth. I mean, you're in a dark room, and you're like yourself and that other person on the screen, and like a third entity that's a combination between the two, and you're making decisions, and someone else is actually acting out these decisions. So there's something very very disorienting. It's not like watching TV. As you said, you're actually in the game, and therefore, even if you're just running around, trying to help Yoshi out, there's something very odd about the whole experience.
Is that how Yoshi is, Ryan?
Yoshi is so apocalyptic.
Well, I think, Super Mario Galaxy could be seen as apocalyptic. The opening sequence of that is insane. Bowser just destroys the Mushroom Kingdom, but it's all kind of very stylized, so you don't really get a sense. It's a big poof, and then all that's left is the castle, and then we're off into space.
Like a majority of the games begin with okay, it's the end of the world, everything as you know it is gone, now you're the hero. In this case, you're a plumber, but still,
yes. Ostensibly, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Although somehow your brother seems to find the most inopportune moments to send you letters throughout the game. And
it's interesting, life has to go on,
But back to Resident Evil, I mean, it touches upon, as you noted, contemporary themes, because the whole basis of Resident Evil is chemical warfare. There's a big gigantic pharmaceutical corporation, which we all do business with, buy their aspirin, and they designed something that's going to turn everyone to zombies, and oh my God, this could possibly happen, wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Well, so I would, pan out and say, or maybe focus, I don't know, at least take some perspective and say, okay, on the one hand, of course, it's doom is something that happens to all of us, right? So it's usually the whole world is destroyed and we're all going to die, or at least few of us survive. I think on a very mechanical level, video games allow an individual player to sort of, and this is what they call sort of the denial of death, right? So I can die, but then I can climb back on the horse, or try again. So there's a degree of personal doom is sort of, basically made irrelevant, because you can go back to a previous same point. You can either, you can use cheat codes, whatever. You can sort of experience doom without actually experiencing it on a very individual
there are no
level.
consequences to that.
There you go.
Now, as far as I've seen in my mind, there seems to be like two different interpretations of the apocalypse in a video game. Or there's multiple, but there's two that instantly stick out. There's one where, like, okay, again, the apocalypse is simply a tool to service the story. Like, all right, it's the end of the world, or we're in the brink or in the midst of the end of the world, society is crumbling, a la Resident Evil or Left 4 Dead, where everyone's trying to scramble and just try to make do. Then you have other games in which, okay, it's the end of the world, the bomb just happened, now you're surviving. And there's certain games in which, like, you're, again, trying to make do with what you can in resources. And there's other games in which, okay, now you can rebuild society. And I think that was more an element of like Fallout 2, if I'm not mistaken, right?
I think Fallout 3 is fantastic, fantastic game. It really does a good job of giving you such a variety of options, but I think it also, games that strive so far to do that their limitations become evident as well a lot more quickly. Things like in the game where you can't where you can't attack children and different things, where it's they still construct these rules that I think they almost seem worse when there is so much you can do.
Yeah,
it's
so
like,
I agree. There's no sense of, okay, so if this is really sort of a dog-eat-dog kind of world where you have to kill what you want to eat, there is a degree of like, okay, we can't have adults murdering little kids, right?
Yeah.
So ultimately there is some kind of code of conduct that makes its way in there. But so that I think also speaks a lot to the society in which these games sort of emerge in that sense. And I think those are the themes that you see a lot more coming from the East. The Japanese and Korean and Chinese development companies, they will incorporate different types of doom scenarios and themes and storylines. And so one thing that pops in my head is, for instance, is Silent Hill. Without giving away sort of the whole plot, it has a lot to do with the death of your own child sort of thing, and which is not as likely of a doom scenario to take on for a Western developer, I would argue. So I think that's very interesting.
No, it's funny you mentioned Silent Hill, and I was sort of going to touch upon that. Like, in the East, people have a very different view on death, and the end of the world is much more internalized. In the upcoming Silent Hill game for the Wii, basically you're playing a character that's recounting what's happened, and you're in a psychiatrist's office. And in the beginning of the game, the psychiatrist will ask you questions that will fit your psychological model, which will then be incorporated. These questions include, like, have you ever cheated on your girlfriend? Have you ever willingly not helped someone who's in peril? And then these things, I mean, maybe we're getting off topic in terms of the apocalypse, but it's a very internal thing where, like, I've noticed a lot of Japanese, primarily role-playing games, like, again, it's that example I cited where, like, it's the end of the world, now you have to pick up the pieces, where a lot of Western games, such as Fallout and Left 4 Dead, is more in the moment of, like, calamity, like, oh my God, what are we going to do? Everyone's scrambling. And I think Eastern games are a little more hopeful in the sense that, okay, there's obviously bad apples, but if we really pull our bootstraps up, we can help rebuild society. And the Western ones, like, man, everyone's out for it, and it's hell on earth, and you had better get on the game or you're going to die, and et cetera, et cetera.
Well, yeah, and traditionally with RPGs, Eastern RPGs tend to be more restrictive, and you are this hero, yeah. You are Cloud Strife, you are so-and-so, so-and-so, whereas Western RPGs, and particularly companies like BioWare and Bethesda, it's all about it's you. You're the, you know, you're the traveler of the wastes. You name your character, you build your character, and that's something I definitely prefer. But as we were talking about before, those limitations still always come up.
Yeah, I mean, I would add that that's one of the big draws for me in sort of looking at these games, is that you can experience it on a very, you know, and you can play and then play again and make different decisions, you know, and so fundamentally, you know, in that sense, games are a way to experiment and simulate certain scenarios. And sort of, you know, one of my students the other day came up with this example, and you know, I didn't grow up in the U.S., so I was unaware, but there's something called make your own adventure, or your own
choose your own adventure.
Choose your own adventure, yeah.
And so, and she was telling me about how, you know, you make a decision to go, you know, to page 14 as opposed to 16, and then sort of want to figure out what the consequences of your decision are. And so, well, I don't want to die, so I'm going back to page 12. And so that you really just kind of experiment with the sort of decision tree that you're working with. And I think that is a big draw in video games, and that you really get to just, well, you know, maybe I don't want to be the nice heroic builder character. I want to just, you know, shoot everything and loot all the dead corpses, you know, whatever fantasy you want to play out. And so I think that's on an individual level very, very interesting, and very, you know, it at least provides the space for it, so to say.
Right, but a lot, as we just saw, a lot of particularly Western apocalyptic games do have this sort of, you know, the one path that you have to follow in order to survive, which, you know, puts me in mind, if you want to get, you know, philosophical here, puts me in mind it's almost a Christian theme, right? I mean, there's the one true path to redemption, and if you follow it, you would defeat the evil undead. As opposed to, well, you know, there are many scenarios and many things you could do. Yeah. The 8 paths to survival.
That's.
Well, I want to show a video. I don't know if it's going to become really, if it's going to work out too much. But okay, here's an opening cinematic from a game. It's a popular series in Japan called Shin Megami Tensei. Is anyone familiar with this game at all? It's been popular for the past couple of years. Have you guys heard of it?
I actually haven't.
Okay, it's a typical video game intro. It's very dramatic. There's lots of weird biblical text and all that junk. All right, we get it. So, okay, in this game, you're a regular high school student, similar to Matthew Broderick in the War Games, and you and your friends are just walking along, and you see a high school teacher of yours, and she's like, oh, by the way, the world's going to end in about 15 minutes, and the world ends in 15 minutes. Now, everything is wiped out, except you are imbued with, like, special powers, along with your friends. And what you have to do in this post-apocalyptic landscape is try to figure out what the hell's going on and try to rebuild society. There's these monsters that are sort of based in Japanese mysticism, and they have certain religious contexts. But again, it's like this weird mix of like, death happens, it's the end of the world, and it's sort of like, it's almost sort of anticlimactic. Like it happens, boom, and then you just have to sort of pick up the pieces. I mean, it's certainly dramatic that everyone in the world dies, but it's like, okay, that happens, get out of the way. So, and also the monsters you encounter are very sort of vaguely cartoony-esque. They're sort of caricatures. Like, I think you saw like a skull guy on a moped a few minutes ago. All right, so that's Nocturne. That's a very Japanese game. Let's take a look at Left 4 Dead, which is a very American game, which we were talking about earlier.